So, you know how sometimes you stumble across something and you think, wait, everybody needs to hear this?
Yeah, definitely.
This is one of those times.
Oh, really?
Yeah, you shared this video with me about this conference on Trump's mental fitness for office. And it's provocative.
Yeah.
It's really provocative, and it raises some important questions.
It does, yeah.
That we should probably unpack a little bit.
Yeah. It is unusual, I have to say, to see this many professionals coming together like this.
Right.
To make this kind of statement.
It's not every day you see a room full of psychiatrists.
Right.
Lawyers, historians, and even a nuclear scientist.
Yeah.
All agreeing that the president's mental state is a cause for concern.
Right. And it's not just coming from, political opponents or, people who are, predisposed to dislike him or disagree with his policies.
Right.
This is coming from experts in their field.
Absolutely.
Who are concerned about his mental state.
It adds a whole other layer to it.
Yes.
Doesn't it?
It does.
So let's dive in. Let's dive into this video and see what they had to say. The conference was called The More Dangerous Case of Donald Trump.
Right.
And it was held at the National Press Club in D.C.
Okay.
And it features 18 experts.
Okay.
Who believe that Trump's psychological makeup poses a danger to the country. Particularly when it comes to nuclear weapons.
And the fact that it's not just, we've all heard these concerns raised in, op-eds and on cable news and things like that.
Right.
But the fact that it's professionals, mental health professionals who are saying this, I think makes it all the more significant.
Absolutely.
Because they are the ones who are trained to recognize these patterns, to understand these behaviors.
It adds a whole other layer of complexity to the conversation.
It does.
So one of the central figures in this video is Dr. Bandy Lee, who is a forensic psychiatrist, and she organized the conference.
Okay.
And she talks about this idea of a duty to warn. Have you heard of this?
I have. It's a really important concept in mental health ethics.
Yes.
And it essentially means that if a mental health professional sees a patient posing a danger to themselves or others, they have a responsibility to speak up. They have a duty to warn.
To warn.
Which, in a more, typical clinical setting is one thing.
Right.
But when you're talking about the president of the United States.
Right. How does that apply?
Exactly.
When the patient in question is the president of the United States.
And it raises some, really complex ethical questions because on the one hand, you have this duty to warn, but on the other hand, you have things like patient confidentiality.
Right.
And the potential for abuse, right? If mental health professionals are seen as, being able to kind of weaponize their diagnoses.
Right.
For political purposes.
Right. It's not exactly a typical doctor-patient relationship.
It's not, no.
And so that's kind of the tightrope that they're walking, right?
Exactly, and it's really uncharted territory because we've never really had a situation like this before, where you have this many mental health professionals publicly expressing concerns about the mental fitness of a sitting president.
Right, and this is something they talk about in the video.
They do. They talk about how they're not just worried about Trump's mental state in a vacuum.
Right.
They're worried about how it intersects with his role as president.
Right.
They're worried about how his psychological makeup might be affecting his decision-making, his temperament.
And the power that goes with it.
Precisely.
Right.
They see his psychological makeup combined with the authority of a presidency as a potentially very dangerous combination, especially when you're talking about things like nuclear weapons,
which they see as a very real and present danger.
Absolutely. Yeah. And they point to Trump's own words and actions as evidence.
Okay, so let's talk about that then. What are the specific concerns about his mental state? The video mentions something called malignant narcissism.
Yes.
Which, I mean, it sounds pretty intense.
It does sound intense, and it is a serious diagnosis.
Okay.
So malignant narcissism is a specific subtype of narcissistic personality disorder.
Okay.
And it's characterized by a few key traits. So like other forms of narcissism, it involves a lack of empathy.
A grandiose sense of self-importance, a need for admiration, and a willingness to exploit others.
Okay.
But with malignant narcissism, you also see things like paranoia, a lack of remorse, and a vindictive streak.
And the experts at this conference felt that this diagnosis fit.
They did.
Fit Trump's behavior.
They did. And they went beyond just like throwing the term around.
Right.
They weren't just sort of, casually diagnosing him from afar.
Sure.
They pointed to very specific behaviors and tendencies that they felt aligned with this diagnosis.
Like what? Give me some example.
Well, they talked about his extreme reactions to criticism.
Right.
His tendency to lash out at perceived enemies.
Right.
His disregard for rules and norms.
His often contradictory statements.
Right.
All of these things, they argued, were not just quirks or flaws.
Right.
But rather evidence of a deeper psychological pattern.
And they saw these as more than just quirks or flaws. They saw them as evidence of a deeper psychological
pattern. Exactly.
Yeah.
They believed that these behaviors pointed to a disregard for others, a lack of remorse, and potentially very dangerous inability to accept responsibility for his actions, all of which they argued
and all of which
had very real implications for his ability to govern effectively and safely.
And remember, this diagnosis isn't coming from, his political opponents. This is coming from mental health professionals who have dedicated their lives to
understanding human behavior.
To understanding this.
Yes.
So it's not something to be taken lightly.
It's a serious claim.
It's a serious claim.
That needs to be considered carefully.
Right. Now, did they use, because, everybody diagnoses people.
Right.
Right. We all have opinions.
Sure.
Did they use any sort of rubric or any sort of,
Yeah, so they talk about this in the video.
Okay.
That they didn't just rely on, their professional opinion or anecdotal evidence.
Okay.
They actually used a quantitative tool.
What does that mean? Like a test?
Yeah, like a standardized assessment.
Okay.
A kind of assessment tool that mental health professionals use to evaluate and diagnose personality disorders.
Wow. So they're bringing in some objective measures.
Exactly. They're not just saying, well, he seems narcissistic.
Right.
They're saying, we have data to support this.
Interesting.
And the results of this assessment, they argue, further support their concerns about Trump's mental fitness for office.
Okay.
So it's not just their opinion.
Right.
It's rooted in their clinical expertise, and it's backed up by established psychological assessments.
That's a pretty compelling argument.
It's concerning.
So they believe that Trump exhibits these traits that are consistent with malignant narcissism, and they're worried how that might impact his presidency.
Precisely.
Especially when it comes to things like nuclear weapons.
Right. They see it as a dangerous combination of personality traits and access to incredible power.
So where do we go from here? What else do they have to say about this? What are the potential consequences if they're right?
Well, that's where things start to get really interesting, I think.
Okay.
Because they don't just sort of lay out this diagnosis and then leave it at that.
Right.
They connect it to very specific potential consequences.
Okay.
For the country and for the world.
So let's talk about those potential dangers.
Okay.
So we're talking about a sitting president whose mental fitness is being called into question by, leading experts.
Yeah.
They're specifically concerned about, his impulsivity, his disregard for consequences, and his access to nuclear weapons.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think this is where the video, really starts to drive home.
Right.
The potential danger.
Yes.
In very, very stark terms.
Right. Okay.
And there's a point where one of the conference attendees recounts this really chilling firsthand experience.
You mean the part about the nuclear explosion?
Yes.
That sent chills down my spine.
Yeah, it's really powerful.
Yeah.
And, it's one thing to talk about these things in the abstract.
Sure.
Right, to talk about the destructive power of nuclear weapons, but to hear someone who has actually witnessed it, who has seen the devastation firsthand, I think it adds a whole other level of weight and urgency to the conversation.
You could really feel it too.
Yeah.
You could feel the weight of that experience in his words.
Absolutely.
And it made the whole conversation feel so much more urgent.
Yes. And I think that was the point.
Yeah.
Right. To remind people that this isn't just some kind of, theoretical debate.
Right.
This is about real lives, real people, and the very real potential for catastrophic consequences.
And the very real fact that, like, this stuff has happened.
Right, exactly.
This is not out of the realm of possibility.
And they're not just speculating about, you know, what Trump might do.
Right.
They're pointing to his actual behavior as cause for concern.
So they believe that Trump's psychological makeup makes him uniquely ill-equipped to handle that kind of responsibility.
That's a fair assessment of their argument. Yeah. They connect his personality to these very concrete examples of his behavior.
Right.
You know, like his boasting about having a bigger button than Kim Jong-un.
Right.
Or you know, his seemingly flippant remarks about nuclear war.
Right.
And they argue that these aren't just examples of, you know, tough talk or you know, political rhetoric.
Right.
These are red flags.
Because they suggest a fundamental lack of understanding of the gravity of the situation.
Precisely. They worry that he doesn't fully grasp or perhaps even respect the immense power he wields as commander-in-chief.
It's like that old adage.
Yeah.
With great power comes great responsibility.
Exactly.
And it seems like they're saying he might have the power, but he doesn't have the responsibility to go with it.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to put it.
Okay.
And they argue that it's this disconnect, between his personality and the weight of the office he holds.
Right.
That makes the situation so dangerous.
Right, because if you don't respect it, you're more likely to
abuse it or to be careless with it. And you know, and again we're talking about the authority to launch a nuclear strike.
Right.
So the stakes really couldn't be higher.
It's a sobering thought, to say the least.
It is.
So they're basically issuing a warning here.
They are.
They're saying that if Trump is reelected, it could have dire consequences.
Yes.
Not just for the United States, but for the entire world.
That's exactly what they're saying.
Wow.
They see it as a 5-alarm fire.
Right.
And they're trying to wake people up to the very real danger.
So if they're so concerned, what are they suggesting people do about it?
Well, that's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
Right.
And I think, you know, one of the things that makes this video so unsettling is that they don't really offer any easy answers.
Okay.
You know, they're not selling a solution here. They're raising an alarm.
Right.
But they do, I think, emphasize the importance of civic engagement. Right. You know, they talk about the need for informed voters, for holding elected officials accountable, for pushing back against.
So it's a call to action, even if they're not laying out like a step by step.
It's not a 10-point plan to fix the problem.
Right.
But it is a call to action.
Okay.
It's a recognition that we can't just sit back and assume that someone else is going to take care of this, that this is on all of us.
Right, which when you think about it, connects back to that duty to warn idea.
It's all of our duty to protect these institutions, to safeguard our democracy.
Right, so where does that leave us?
Right.
What should we take away from all of this?
Oh, I think it's important to remember that while this video focuses very specifically on Trump and on his mental fitness, it also raises, I think, some broader questions about mental fitness for office in general. About the role of experts in a democracy. About the importance of civic engagement. And these are all, I think, really important questions that we should all be thinking about, regardless of our political affiliations.
So we're left with this. I mean, it's a pretty deeply unsettling picture of a president whose mental capacity for the role is being seriously questioned, and a call to action to safeguard the very foundations of our democracy.
Yes, and I think, one of the things that I find so fascinating and also so troubling about this whole issue is that it's not just about this particular president or even this particular moment in time.
Right.
I mean, this video really forces us to grapple with some really uncomfortable questions about power.
Right.
About mental health, about the future of American democracy.
It makes you wonder how we got here,
It's a big question.
But it's a big question.
And it's one that, historians and political scientists will be debating for years to come, I'm sure. But I think it's safe to say that this video, really highlights the need for a more informed and a more engaged citizenry.
Right. Because if we're not paying attention,
exactly.
If we're not holding our leaders accountable, then we're essentially giving them a free pass to do whatever they want.
You get the leaders you deserve.
Right.
If we're not paying attention, if we're not demanding better, then this is what we're going to get.
Right. And so it's on us.
It is
to not let it get to this.
Yeah, and to hold them accountable.
Right.
When they fall short.
So where do we go from here then?
Right.
What's the takeaway? What's the takeaway for our listener?
I think the takeaway is that this video is a call to action.
Okay.
It's a reminder that democracy is a fragile thing.
Okay.
It requires constant vigilance.
Right.
It requires active participation.
Right.
It's not enough to just sort of be aware of the problems.
Right.
We have to be willing to engage with them, to discuss them, to demand better from our leaders.
It's about recognizing that we all have a role to play in shaping the future that we want to see.
And it starts with being informed.
Right.
Asking tough questions and engaging in these difficult but necessary conversations.
About the kind of world we want to leave for our kids and
for future generations.
Future generations. Yeah. It's a lot to think about.
It is.
But I think these are these are conversations that we need to be having.
Absolutely.
And hopefully this deep dive has given you some new insights, some new perspectives to
I hope so.
To bring to those conversations.
Really? I think it's important to talk about these things,
right?
To not shy away from them,
right?
To be willing to have those uncomfortable conversations.
Yeah, the future of our democracy might very well depend on it.
I think that's right.
Well said.
Thanks.
All right, that's going to do it for this deep dive.
Okay.
Until next time.